All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next topic is absolute and relative difference. We have talked about absolute and relative change. Now we're going to talk about something different. In fact, absolute and relative difference is the name of it. When do you use absolute and relative difference? You use it when you're comparing two things. Whereas before, with absolute and relative change, we were only comparing one thing. For example, my weight at the beginning of COVID and after COVID, or maybe my house price when I bought it versus what it's worth now. So that's one thing. For absolute and relative difference, you're actually just going to be comparing two things. So maybe the wages in Idaho versus the wages in Washington. Maybe comparing a price in the house in the area of Seattle versus an OMAC, maybe comparing the heights of boys versus girls. And mathematically, this is no harder, but what I do find harder is the ability to write a sentence in the correct way after finding your math. So we'll talk about that. So the absolute difference is the actual difference between the compared value and the reference value. So the absolute difference equals compared minus referenced, and you're going to want to write these formulas down. The relative difference is the same thing as relative change with the no formula, n minus o over o, except this time we're going to use the phrasing compared value minus reference value. So pause this video right now, please, and get those notes in. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Here's our first example. The average pay for a South Dakota full-time employee is $30,291. That's true. The average pay in New York average is $55,479. So fill in the blanks. The average pay in South Dakota is blank % less than the average pay in New York. All right. The question is, which one is the compared value and which one's the reference value? Well, we're comparing South Dakota to New York. I'm going to say that again. We're comparing South Dakota to New York. And if we're comparing South Dakota to New York is going to be the reference value. And South Dakota is going to be the compared value. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's do that math. If our compared value is going to be the South Dakota, so this is going to be the compared value, and we're referencing New York, we're going to go ahead and we're going to plug that right into this formula. And because it doesn't say percent, I know I accidentally said that earlier, there's no percent here. We are talking about absolute difference, right? So all I'm going to do is I'm going to do the compared minus the reference value. So compared is going to be 30,291, and then I'm going to subtract 55,479. All right, so that's going to be 30,291 minus 55,479, and that gives me a negative. So ladies and gentlemen, there is an easy way to check your answer being correct or incorrect. We know that we should be having less. We know that this should be negative, and so that's an easy way to check that my answer was correct, that I put these two numbers in the right direction. So our answer here is negative 25,000, but since I said less, I don't need to say the negative. So it's $25,000, 188 less than the average pay. So that was absolute difference. We basically just subtract the two values, and make sure you're subtracting it in a way that it makes sense, so that if you have a less here, you'd get a negative. If you have a more, you'd have a positive. All right. The next one says the average pay in South Dakota is blank % less than the average pay in New York. And so in this case, you're still comparing South Dakota to New York. So this is still the compared, and we're still referencing New York. So I've already done that. I already have my compared minus referenced, but I have to divide by the reference. So I have to divide by 55,479. So I'm going to do this math. Do your numerator first. We already got that, didn't we? Negative 25188 divided by 55,479. And I get negative 0.454. Multiply that by 100, and I get, you could also move the decimal 2 places, I get a negative 45.4%. Did I want a negative? Yes, I did. And if you don't get a negative and it says percent less than, then you know you did it in the wrong direction. So we're going to have an answer of 45.4% less than the average pay in New York. Okay, let's do another one. The average pay for a South Dakota full-time employee is the same value. The average pay in New York is also 55. So same numbers. I now want you to verify that the average pay in New York is 83.2% more than, the average pay in South Dakota. So pause this video and prove that the answer is 83.2. All right, welcome back. So you should have seen that in this statement, we're comparing North Dakota. We're comparing North Dakota to South Dakota. So that's your reference value. And you might want to memorize it that the first value is compared and the second is referenced, but honestly, depending on how it's said, it may not always work that way, but it's a pretty safe assumption. So what I'm going to do now is my compared value is going to be the bigger number, 55,479. Then I'm going to subtract my reference value, which is now South Dakota at 30,291. And now I'm going to repeat that second number, or 30,291. Okay, doing that, I'm going to do it real quickly. In the numerator, I get 25188, and the denominator is still the same. Dividing those two values, I get 0.8315. 0.8315. Multiplying that by 100, I'm going to move my decimal over 2 places, and I get 83.15%, which does in fact round to 83.2. Again, if you're comparing New York to South Dakota in terms of their full-time employee salary, we know that New York is going to be bigger than South Dakota, so we should be getting a positive answer. And if you didn't, you've done it in the wrong direction. So really, it's the same exact formula as the no thing, but you've just got to be a little bit more careful about what direction you subtract in, and obviously that would impact what you have down here. And I personally think the best way to do it is to get your answer and verify that it's the right sign. For example, here we got a positive, which is what we want because it's more. But if you like referencing this as the reference and saying that this is the compared and then using the formula, that's fine as well. All right, if you'd like to do one more practice problem, kind of stay with this video. If you feel good about it, you can move along. But let's go ahead and let's say that the average teacher salary in Washington is about $62,000. The average teacher salary in Massachusetts is actually closer to $78,000. The cost of living in Massachusetts is certainly higher, and that's why. So what if I want to say 4 statements? I want 4 statements. The first statement, I want it to be an absolute difference statement. The next one, I want it to be an absolute difference statement. Next one, I want a relative difference. And the next one, I want another relative difference. So absolute difference is really just subtracting the two values. So for example, I'm going to do 62,000 minus 78,000, and I get negative 16,000. So I would say, on average, a Washington teacher gets paid $16,000 less. And all I've done is subtracted those two numbers. And you can also say vice versa. On average, a Massachusetts teacher gets paid $16,000 more. And if you subtracted those, you would have gotten a positive number if you subtracted in the right direction. Okay, now I want to go ahead and do two relative difference formulas. So I'm going to do my first one, which is 62,000 minus 78,000 divided by 78,000. Get my answer and then multiply by 100. So just give me a second to do that. I get a negative 20.5. And that makes sense, right? I'm basically saying that Washington teachers get paid less. So we would say Washington teachers get paid 20.5% less than Massachusetts teachers on average. Okay. Now, if I do this in the other direction, if I go 78,000 minus 62,000 all over 62,000, remember you got to repeat that second value right here. I'm going to end up with a negative, with a positive number. Let me get that answer for you now, and you could try it too if you want. I get 0.258. I multiply that by 100. And I get 25.8%. So now I have a positive answer, which means instead of saying a less than in my sentence, I'm going to say a more than. So I'll say Massachusetts teachers get paid 25.8% more than Washington teachers on average. Now you might be surprised that these two numbers are not the same, and they're totally different formulas, and that's why that's true. But if someone was trying to argue in Washington State for teachers that they should get paid more, do you think that they would use this statistic or that statistic? Well, very smartly, they tend to use the scarier percentage, so they would probably say this. And it's not wrong. They're both correct. Both of these are correct, but they're going to use the scarier percentage to persuade people. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to do your practice. We'll certainly cover it in class as well. All right, take care.